In this presentation, we will discuss moving expenses for armed forces as an adjustment for AGI. We're considering the second line item of our income tax equation. So we have income, then we have the adjustments above the line or Schedule 1 deductions as opposed to the standard deductions or itemized deductions. So we're talking about moving expenses. Note that you might have a memory of moving expenses prior to this. So if you had a change in a job or something like that, there has been adjustments to the rules that have restricted it in recent years. So be aware of that as you consider these rules if you have some kind of old rules that are still in your mind about the moving expenses. On the first page of the 1040, we're down here on line 8A. So we're considering these adjustments on line 8A, and then that is going to be supported by the Schedule 1. So here's the Schedule 1 Part 2, and we're down here on line 13 of it. There's that 800 that would pull over to the first page of the 1040. So moving expenses for armed forces. So again, note for armed forces. This isn't moving expenses that are job related. You might have a remembrance of that. This is basically the remnants of that has now been restricted. So just keep that in mind if you have those old rules in your mind. When a member of the U.S. Armed Forces is an active duty and moves because of a permanent change of status, they can deduct their unreimbursed moving expenses. So allowed only for members of the U.S. Armed Forces. Again, this is the change. Allowed only to members of the U.S. Armed Forces or their spouse or dependents on active duty. Permanent change of status includes, so what is a permanent change of status? Well, that includes move from their home to their first post of active duty, move from one permanent post of duty to another, and move from their last post of duty to their home or to a nearer point in the United States. Move must occur within 1 year of ending their active duty or within the period allowed under the Joint Travel Regulations. Service member does not include in income. So these are items that would not be included in income. So remember, you might have a situation. Well, what happens if you receive some money related to moving or something like that? And the question there would be that, well, that now you're not talking about the deduction item. You're talking about some compensation, a form of compensation that should be allocated towards the move. And that's something now we're looking at line 1 of our tax equation. We have some type of income, but it's really kind of a reimbursement. So the question there, of course, is do we have to include that in income or not? And the armed forces, hopefully, as they give the documentation for income to basically their employees, like an employer, should reflect this properly within that documentation. It's a similar situation if we had an employer who's responsible for reporting the deduction and whether or not something should be included that they have given to the employee, such as a 401k plan. By the time we are in the tax preparation point, hopefully these types of income that may not be included in income are already reflected in the documentation, so therefore should be fairly straightforward as we input it. But we need to basically understand the law so we can explain that as we do the data input or answer questions about tax planning in the future. So these are items that would not be included in income. Value of moving and storage service provided by the government for a permanent change of station. So if the government said, hey, we're going to provide this money specifically for the move, then it's not really income because it's reimbursing basically the moving expenses. So we wouldn't then record that. So amount, and that would be reflected hopefully in the documentation. Amount received as dislocation allowance, temporary lodging expense, temporary lodging allowance, or move-in housing allowance. So moving expenses for armed forces include, so then we got to think, well, what are moving expenses? How, creative can we get in terms of, what qualifies as a moving expense, which we could then qualify for a deduction for. So we have storage of household goods within a consecutive 30-day period after items are moved from the prior home. Expenses or mileage at the rate of 20 cents per mile for 2019. Expenses for moving of persons other than the military service member if they are members of the service member's household. Expenses for travel, including lodging but not meals, from old home to new home.